to benefit all sentient beings. So the teaching of the Buddha was peaceful, which brings peace and happiness and joy. The gods and other beings are summoned or asked to come here to listen to this teaching, which does away with our disease of negative emotions. Coin. Prostrations or homage to the Gautama, who, moved by his compassion, taught us a holy dharma to rid us of distorted views. So first we'll go through this text, which Geshe Lharampa from Seraje, from Deor Kangzen of Seraje, Geshe Tsulga. I knew him well, and he was a very sincere and dedicated person. And so I knew him from India as well as in America. In Boston, he had a center, Gurukula Center, and I had visited that center. And as his last testament to me, or words, he requested me to teach the text, which is titled Praise to Satisfying Sentient Beings. So I was not familiar at that time with this text, but I said I will think about it. And so the current resident teacher of the Gurukula Center, Geshe, who's the Geshe, had requested me to actually carry out the request by his teacher. And so I received the transmission of this text from Gadintra Rinpoche. So with regard to the text, in the beginning of the text, there is the Master Nagarjuna's commentary to Awakening Mind. And so I also received this transmission of this text from Gadintra Rinpoche. So devoid of all real entities, utterly discarding all objects and subjects such as aggregates, elements and sense fields, due to the sameness of selflessness of all phenomena, one's mind is primarily unborn. It is in the nature of emptiness. This comes from the root tantra of Guya Samanja. So this text is, you can see it as a philosophical text, and also for training the mind, text for training the mind. So it's a very good text that I also read it and think over whenever I have time, when I have more spare time. So this text goes through the self asserted by non-Buddhist traditions, permanent, single and autonomous. And then it also goes through the philosophical assertions of the realists within Buddhism, as well as the Chittamatra philosophy, and then the Madhyamaka. At the end, it teaches the Buddhist generation or cultivation of bodhicitta on the basis of equaling and exchanging self and others. So on 75th, the fruits of which are desirable and undesirable. And so just as I have given it says it's benefiting today that I give them happiness, the fruits which are desirable or undesirable and so forth. And so the next verse, 77 and 78, also is the same in meaning as Chandideva's verse, which says, if you do not exchange one's happiness and joy with the suffering of others, leave alone becoming a Buddha. But even in samsara, you'll have no happiness. And so selfish attitude, thinking only of oneself and disregarding or forgetting others, is a real poison. And so if by relying upon the sentient beings, the unexalted state of Buddhahood is brought about, so what is so astonishing about the fact that whatever prosperities there are in the gods and humans, such as those enjoyed by Brahma, Indra and Rudra, and so the bodhisattvas are said to bodhisattvas gain or attain Buddhahood by forsaking their happiness in for the sake of sentient beings, working for the sentient beings. And the worldly guardians of the world. There is nothing in this triple world that is not brought forth by having helping others. So just as there are Buddhahood and awakening mind and a fortunate birth on the one hand, and unfortunate birth and so forth. So rooted firmly because of compassion and arising from the shoot of awakening, the true awakening that is the sole fruit of altruism. Verse number 85. This is the conqueror's children. The conqueror's children cultivate. And verse number 86 also. So as it is said in Lama Chepa, may I even remain in the hell realm to deliver sentient beings from the samsara. So when through practice it becomes firm, then alarmed by others of suffering, the bodhisattvas renounce the place of concentration and plunge even the depths of relentless hell. This is indeed amazing, praiseworthy it is. This is the excellent way of the sublime, that they give away their own flesh and wealth is not surprising at all. So this text, commentary on Bodhi's awakening mind, is a very great text, and so since it is printed by the center, you should study it as well. Those under the power of compassion display acts of departing birth and merriment, renouncing kingdom, engaging in ascetic penance, great awakening, and defeating the maras, turning the wheel of Dharma, entering the realm of all gods. In order to serve oneself and others' interests in samsara, there is nothing greater than practicing and cultivating bodhicitta, and therefore the Buddhas have not seen nothing but bodhicitta as the source of all happiness. So there is also a prose form of this text, but this one is the one in verse form. So we'll go through the text. The next text praised to satisfy sentient beings. In the Indian language, Sattuv Aradhana Stovam. In the Tibetan language, Simchen Gor Chavete. In English, praise to satisfying sentient beings, homage to Manju Shri. And so, first verse shows that one should not give up on sentient beings, but have to single-pointedly think of sentient beings and have this special resolve to deliver sentient beings from suffering. And with that, you'll be able to overcome even the obscuration to knowledge and become a Buddha. And whoever subsequently engaged in compassion for sentient beings, and that one not only pleases me, that one also carried the responsibility of the teachings, ethics, learnings, compassion, wisdom and clarity. Whoever possesses these always please the Buddha. Thus, I myself achieved this attainment by benefiting sentient beings. Therefore, it is only for sentient beings' sake that I have perfectly held this body and so forth. And so the Buddha himself generated and cultivated and developed bodhicitta for the benefit of all sentient beings, and then engaged in the bodhisattva practices over countless eons. And so, harming sentient beings, for them, those who harm sentient beings or have the intent to harm sentient beings, since they do not look to me for guidance, I will not teach them. Or he's saying that I am not their teacher. Although the benefit of sentient beings was little, that one will receive the benefit of having made an offering, since whatever pleases the mind of the Buddha is an offering. While having a harmful nature or having harmed others, one may have offered in a good manner, but that will not become an offering. My wife, son, wealth, great kingdom, flesh, blood, fat, eyes, and even bodies, overpowered by compassion, I gave away these fully to anyone. Thus, if harm is done to them, harm will have been done to me. And so verse number 6 at the end says, how could one causing harm to sentient beings be my disciple? So this is a very powerful statement, isn't it? And so I usually say that even as an ordinary person, if you have a very trusted friend, and if you invite that friend for a meal, although you may like very hot chili, but on that day, when you invite your friend, you will not make the food very hot in accordance with the taste of your friend who doesn't like any chili. And so when we take refuge in the Buddha, when we say that we are taking refuge in the Buddha, but then in our action, if we do things as if it doesn't really matter to us whatever the Buddha thinks, I mean, what does that look like then? And therefore, we should always dedicate ourselves, determine ourselves to follow in the footsteps of the Buddha, to follow his instructions. And therefore, if you respect the Buddha and you wish to heed the Buddha's advice, and then what you should do is help those beings who have no protection, no protectors, or no guides, and who are suffering. And how can you abuse, deceive, and be untruthful to them? And so Buddhas and Bodhisattvas always see what we do. So we cannot do something, we cannot be hypocrite. And so the Buddhas are able to see everything without any obstruction, and therefore we cannot escape from their sight. And therefore we cannot escape doing. I please the Buddhas and cultivate virtue in dependence on sentient beings. I attain the perfections by thoroughly abiding in the welfare of many sentient beings. My mind that strove for the welfare of sentient beings subjugated even the Mara's force. Having practiced in such ways towards sentient beings, I thereby purified and perfected. So and became Buddha. How the Buddha became perfect and enlightened is by working for the sentient beings and cultivating virtues, and also the wisdom realizing emptiness, bodhicitta, and so forth. And then verse number 8. If living beings who are like cherished relatives of many lifetimes did not exist, by observing whom, in this case, would compassion and love have been established, equanimity, joy, and so forth, objects of mind, emancipation, and so forth, focusing on whom? For whose purpose, having generated compassion, did the mind that strove for the others' welfare meditate on patience for a long time? I gave away to others elephants and so forth, many times my created beings, so that sentient beings would also become vessels. I gathered them with generosity. Because sentient beings were subject to various sufferings, I increased my compassion. If I do not protect sentient beings, then for whose sake did I achieve these two purposes? If I were no sentient beings, if there were no sentient beings, since there would be no continuum of life, it says, as long as there are sentient beings, we should serve them and be altruistic. So His Holiness finished reading this text, 11 verses, and this completes the Buddha's speech to the 16 Arhat hearers in the passage called Salty River, from the collection of Bodhisattva teachings compiled into verses by Nagarjuna as praise to satisfying sentient beings. It was translated by the great abbot Devankara, Srijana, and the translator Bhikshu Tsidim Gyalwa. So there is also a commentary to this text, which I do not have the transmission of, so I will not read. So if I could push through, perhaps I would finish the part that we are left with before the insight section. And then from tomorrow, we can start the insight section of Lam Rim. So it seems the relevant page has gone to the other. So the actual way to achieve mental quiescence. Oh, His Holiness is going to go through the Shamar Lam Rim. The sixth, which is the cultivation of the perfection of wisdom. So wisdom is that mind which is critically analyzing the things, and when you complete the familiarization with it, what it turns into is the perfection of wisdom. And with regard to the division, there are three: ultimate wisdom realizing ultimate reality, and then wisdom realizing the conventional phenomena, and then wisdom realizing the practice of benefiting other sentient beings. And so with regard to the teaching of selflessness, it is only found in the teaching of the Buddha. And so with regard to the selflessness, there are two: selflessness of persons and phenomena. And so the actor, the agent who creates karma, and the karma, and then the agent also is the one who appropriates the psychophysical aggregates, and the psychophysical aggregates are so on the basis of the person you realize the selflessness of persons, and then on the basis of psychophysical aggregates which are appropriated by that person, you meditate. There is meditation on selflessness of phenomena. So in the first turning of the wheel of the Dharma, the Buddha taught only selflessness of persons in regard to the selflessness in terms of absence of permanent, unitary, and autonomous person. And then later he went on to teach the selflessness in terms of lack of self-sufficiently, substantially existent self. And then not only the Buddha taught the selflessness of persons, but he also taught the selflessness of phenomena, as it is found in the Heart Sutra, where it says these 5 aggregates also should be seen as empty of inherent nature. And the word also, which is found in Tibetan, seems to be missing in Chinese translation. And not in Chinese. It's missing in Chinese, but not in Tibetan. And when I checked with the Sanskrit original, then I found that the word also is actually there. And so it has a special meaning and significance to have that word also. Not only, which means that that word signifies that not only the person is devoid of any self-existence, any independent true existence, but even the aggregates, which are the basis for the person's designation of the person, are empty of any intrinsic existence. And so in order to be able to avert or overcome grasping at the person as having true existence, you need to overcome also or refute the object held by grasping at true existence of psychophysical aggregates. And then this also has a significance in the sense that during the first turning of the wheel of the Dharma, the Buddha didn't teach selflessness of persons, whereas during the second turning of the wheel of Dharma, he did teach the selflessness of phenomena as well. And so we could interpret it like that. So, of course, in general, in the first sermon of the Buddha, during the teaching on the Four Noble Truths, and there's no detailed teaching of selflessness of persons, but within the sutras, you may find some mention here and there about the selflessness of persons. And therefore, it's important to rely on a scholar or a learned person who knows the scriptures very well, unmistakably. There are various ways the Buddha taught to different beings with different mental dispositions. Since such teachings are there, and therefore, for the realists, the Vibhashikas, Sutrantikas, and so they assert that the teaching of the Buddhas are all definitive, that they can be taken literally, whereas in the higher philosophical schools, according to them, there are the division or distinction between the interpretables and definitive teachings. In other words, the teachings which the scriptures which teach primarily focused on the ultimate reality are definitive teachings, and those teachings which focus mainly on the conventional reality are said to be provisional teachings, and therefore it is one should rely on. This is about meditation on the special insight mainly. For that, one needs to rely on a scholar who knows the scriptures unmistakably, correctly. And so those who were not able to understand the in Chandrakirti's Madhyamaka Avatara and its Bhashya, its commentary, Koto commentary, he says that whether, he raised this question, would you say that there is such masters such as Dhammapala and so forth had not understood and comprehended the teaching of this Vajraparamita Sutras precisely? And he answers yes, from the point of view of Madhyamakas. And with regard to commentary on Mula Madhyamaka Karika by Nagarjuna, there is the commentary by Buddha Palita, which is also the title of the text is Buddha Palita, which is short but very terse. And then, like the Bhaviveka also wrote the Lamb of Wisdom, which is commentary to the Mula Madhyamaka Karika, and also Chandrakirti wrote Prasana Pada. And therefore, one should listen to the root text as well as the commentaries to Nagarjuna and his disciples' text. And having heard the teaching, we should critically analyze the teaching and with regard to the and realize this view of reality or suchness. And with regard to the Menngak or split instructions, Jerimbuche says in his Lam Rim Chemo, so Menngak, and so there's no greater person than the Buddha himself who has given pit instruction, and then also Master Nagarjuna and his disciples. And so the great treatises written by these great masters are the pit instructions. Apart from that, Tsongkhapa says there you cannot consider something separate to be Menngak or instructions, pit instructions. So it's difficult to have real Menngak or instructions, pit instructions, apart from these texts written by the great masters. And when it comes to Tantra, perhaps there are certain teachings which are meant for, tailored for specific beings. And Nyengwen Songrapa has made this distinction between the general structure of the teaching and then teachings which are tailored for specific disciples. So these teachings of Tantra were given or were received by beings who have very special pure karma, and because of that, then the Buddha appeared in different forms of deities in sacred Tantra, according to the physiological structure and also the drops and channels and chakras and so forth of those disciples. And the Buddha arose in the form of deities and mandalas. And so few of these teachings, of course, such as these, were meant and tailored for that specific person to whom the vision appeared. But when you think about the pit instructions, you should be able to draw and actually, if it helps to understand and comprehend the classic texts, then that's a true Menngak or pit instruction. Whereas if that doesn't happen, of course, those teachings, which are called Menngaks, may be taught for some purpose and reason. So, Tsongkhapa says that Menga is not something that comes in the ear-whispered lineage from one master into the ears of a disciple, but the great treatises should be treated as the pit instructions. And so one should those who aspire to liberation and omniscience should rely on these pit instructions of which in accord with the great treatises. and realize the suchness. One should look for the realization of the suchness of selflessness. And so if you look at the life story of Tsongkhapa himself, he had studied extensively, but then he was exhorted by Manjushri to go and live the life of an ascetic and hermit, and make prostrations, do purification practice, as well as accumulating merit, with meditation on his exalted or his special meditation tutelary deity. And therefore he went to Lhading and by heeding Manjushri's advice, he went to Lhading and did meditation accordingly, and that's the place where he wrote the praise for dependent origination, to the Buddha for teaching dependent origination. And so all the misfortunes in the samsara have their root in the true grasping at true existence, which is ignorance, and the ignorance together with its imprints. And to uproot them, we should realize that with the wisdom realizing emptiness, which goes against that. And so we need to differentiate between the things appearing, the dependent nature of things, and that the things are how things appear to us as if they have some independent objective existence. And so once you have realized emptiness, then you would be able to see how things are merely designated. And Je Rinpoche writes, those who have studied the profound texts of the Madhyamakas, to you it may be difficult for you to assert that things are merely a name, but you should push your mind and direct it towards that realization. So there are two ways of how things can exist. Either they could have some existence from their own side, or by way of designation. And when you use critical reasoning, logic, and critical and investigation analysis, then you can only find the fact that things are by name, exist by name. And in the commentary by Tsongkhapa on Madhyamaka Avatara, also he says the fact that things are merely a name, this is the most difficult to assert and to be able to gain conviction, and this is the most difficult part in Madhyamaka philosophy. So one should listen to the instructions of on the insight, special insight from on the teachings of one's spiritual friends. And then also meditating one's masters, as well as the one's meditation special deity, to be inseparable from each other, and make one's fervent prayers and supplications to them. One should strive in purification and accumulation practices and so forth. And this way one should be able to get to the right point of gaining or gathering all the prerequisites. And so with regard to the distinction making this distinction from the between the self-sufficiently substantially existent self and the selflessness of the person, the subtler one, it's very difficult to differentiate when you think about take the person as the basis. And so actually it happened to me once when I was reading that in Tsongkhapa's writing that everything is merely, the person is merely designated. At that point, some kind of a lightning bolt struck me, and after that, then I could, what the impact I had was that everything does not have any objective existence at all. But when I used the person myself as the basis for that critical analysis, I could confirm that there is no person which exists independently or objectively. But when I shifted that focus to the body and the aggregates, then that does not happen as much as it happened with the other one. Therefore, it shows that I had not realized the subtle selflessness of persons yet, because Rinpoche also says that unless one has refuted or the selflessness of refuted the self in phenomena, the psychophysical aggregates, one will not fully understand the selflessness of persons. And so that made sense to me from that experience that I had. And so, still, even if we may think that we have the understanding and deeper insight into selflessness of persons, we should still check whether that is the precise selflessness of wisdom of selflessness or not, by checking it against checking our experience against our analysis using the psychophysical aggregates as the focus. And so, with regard to selflessness, establishing it, there are two outlines. The one is establishing the selflessness of persons. With regard to its meditation, there are 4 points. As Rinpoche says, first, we need to think about how things are designated by our conceptual mind, and then understand. Rinpoche says that it helps to understand how things exist, how things exist in the sense that they do not have any objective, independent existence. When you think along that line. And then there are other reasonings, the four-sided or the Theta Lemma. And then the king of all these reasonings of emptiness, to prove emptiness, is dependent origination, as Dalai Lama Rinpoche says. So, dependent origination, the word itself helps to do away with the two extreme views. Dependence so the Buddha, the Nagarjuna says that when the realists criticize him, argue against him, the Nagarjuna says that you have not understood the meaning, the nature, and the purpose of the emptiness. So, and Nagarjuna says in the Ratnavali that the person or a being, because he is made up of or designated on the basis of the 6 elements, therefore he does not have any real entity. So since we cannot go against, deny the fact that the person exists, Nagarjuna says that the person is designated on the basis of these six elements. And Madhyamaka Avatara by Chandrakirti also says that when you analyze or investigate a person into the sevenfold through the sevenfold reasoning, there cannot be a person apart from being designated. So when you analyze it through the sevenfold reasoning, the person will not exist in any of these ways, whereas by worldly renown, a person could exist. But to us, this does not happen. A person does not appear as to be designated, but as if it has some objective existence. And therefore, the debate or argument back and forth, between Bhavaviveka and Chandrakirti are not only to outdo Bhavaviveka's position, but it also has its significance on our meditation on selflessness. So in Hokdong, the Rinpoche's insight section of Lam Rim Chemo, he goes through the there's no separate outline for meditation on, for differentiating between the subtle and gross levels of the selflessness. But in the intermediate Lam Rim by Tsongkhapa, he makes this distinction. There's a special outline for that. So, with regard to that, there are 4 points. The first is the point of recognizing or identifying the object of negation, which is very important, it says in the text. So if you are able to identify only a rough object of negation, then you may be able to refute that much, but you cannot still refute the apprehended. You cannot refute what is remained as an object of negation of this grasping at true existence. And therefore, this earlier realization will not undermine your exaggeration of selfhood, and you would be still fallen in the extreme of exaggeration. And when you refute too much, then you could even deny the existence of conventional phenomena as well, therefore falling into nihilism. And there's every danger to that if you excessively refute when it comes to identifying the object of negation. And therefore, when you reflect on how this the innate grasping at a self of a person or at a self, and how it grasps at that independent self, then you could think along these lines. It says that when you are actually going through a very narrow path and at the called through some cliff, and you would always be concerned that you may fall off the cliff, and therefore be very careful. And so at that point, when you have that kind of fear of falling off the cliff, the eye actually appears in a very clearly to the mind. And then also and then when you think about having created negative karmas, grave negative karmas, and you fear that you may fall into the hell realm, at that point, due to that fear, there is a certain way of how the person actually appears to you very clearly. And so these are due to some conditions. So Jetsun Sherab Singye, when we're listening to Jetsun Kapa's teaching on selflessness, he actually had this fear, and he held onto his shirt, the flap of the shirt on the side. And so there is this story. So His Holiness was commenting on the difference between those of sharp faculty and duller faculty in the text. So and so the 4 points basically are the identification of the object of negation, and then also the understanding that the self is not one with the aggregates, inherently one with aggregates, and then the self is not inherently separate or different from the aggregates, because there are logical fallacies that you would have to face, and arguments and logical fallacies that you would have to assert these. And then the fourth one is and so His Holiness is on the point of the meditation on selflessness of phenomena, which is the next topic. And so quantum physics, in quantum physics, people, when they look for subtler particles, subatomic particles, and so forth, the waves and so forth, then they cannot actually have anything that they can hold on to as being this or that in the end. No objective existence, they say. And in science, among scientists, the classical scientists have said that there is no mind or consciousness apart from our brain, but current neuroscientists do not assert such things now because of their further research. And there are even some who think that the consciousness may be something different from the past. And then there are scientists who also say that they believe in future lives. And so 2 years ago, when we had the Mind and Life conference in Drepung, one of the scientists, physicist Arthur Zayans, said in the conference that he is not a Buddhist, but he believes in past and future lives. And so there is change in the position of scientists today. So the body is, of course, made up of matter, but which, if you divide it up into its smaller parts and particles, subatomic particles and so forth, there's nothing that you can actually posit as being the body as such. And therefore, they say there's no objectively existent things. So if the body were to have any inherent existence, then when you do analysis of the body into its parts and subparts and so forth, smaller parts, you should be able to show something as being the body, but this is not possible. And so with regard to the matter or the physical things, there is an extension to the spatial dimension to it, and then the consciousness can only be understood in terms of temporal sequence. And therefore, it's very difficult when you go into the past and the present and future of the consciousness. The present even cannot be pointed and pinpointed. And therefore, in the chapter on motion, on examination of motion in Mula Madhyamaka Karika, it says that you cannot find the present if you analyze it within one's walking or steps that you take. And when you do this kind of analysis on a person, for example, usually we think, oh, there is something, and we feel there is something out there, the person or things and so forth. But when you actually analyze them, then there's nothing that you can actually hold on to as being the person or anything. And therefore, in Pramanavartika, study of Pramanavartika, we study about positive and negative phenomena and so forth. So this differentiation, or within the negative phenomena, there are the negative phenomena which are called implicative negatives and affirming negative. And so these could be applied to our meditation on emptiness as well in the middle way philosophy. And therefore, when you come to the point of finding that there's really nothing that you can pinpoint as being this or that, then you get to the point of meditation on emptiness, which is like space. And so, in the end, you will find some kind of a state of emptiness or called vacuity, and having analyzed whether the person is one with the inherently one with the psychophysical aggregates, or inherently separate or different from the psychophysical aggregates, you will find none of these to be true. And finally, because the self is neither one nor separate, inherently separate, one or separate from these psychophysical aggregates, you'll be able to confirm that the self has no independent existence, inherent existence at all. And then because of that, there is some kind of a spaciousness or emptiness, and at that your mind should focus on that emptiness, where you don't affirm anything, but it's a mere negation of independent and existence. In other words, mere absence of independent existence is what you finally realize. And so with regards to the mere designation through dependence, since you cannot find anything to have any independent existence. Therefore, by default, you come to the conclusion that things are merely designated. And therefore, since things do exist, you could say that they are dependently existent by way of designation, although they do not have any objective independent existence. Oh. So with regard to the three principal aspects of the path, where it says that without alternating but simultaneously, when you see that things are dependent, that they do not have any independent existence. And so with regard to the synonymity between dependent origination and emptiness, it is not the case that one is the word, the name, and the other is the meaning, nor that that they actually imply one another, called one being directly. I mean, when you mention one directly, that implicitly you imply the other, and so forth. That's not the meaning. So Nyengun Songrapa has written a very nice commentary to this point.
Do you remember the line before that it's similar to the head of a wolf? So this quotation is actually cited in the presentation, the extensive presentation on tenet by Gunjin Chan Shiva Rinpoche. And this is something to do with the Vajrayana teaching, and where it is considered, it is stated that the supreme antidote is the very subtle mind which understands the emptiness, the mind which is itself in the very subtlest form of consciousness, and that understand emptiness is the supreme antidote. And of course, the presentations in the comment to the other texts, but when the subtlest form of the mind becomes evident, the gross level of the mind becomes latent, and also I think that also taking into the desire as a means of to help other. Sorry. And these are in corresponding to the practice of the very subtlest mind, and when someone has great control over this practice, and so one can attain such states. And this is also that we found in the Great Completion teachings. And Benjamin Lawson Chögyam has also stated that we need to be very expert in the definitive sutras in the text. And when we refer to the definitive presentation, then it has to be also taken into account the presentations from the highest Yoga Tantra and the Sutra and so on. And from at the beginning level, so if you try to practice the very subtle and the highest practices, then of course it will lead to more problems and more catastrophe. Therefore, we need to practice something which is relevant to our levels. So reading from page number 299, Shaman Lam Rim. As we know that he didn't went to an institute to do great studies, but his understanding and the practice is unsurpassed and supreme among all the scholars. And Milarepa's presentations and his teachings are something which we cannot find in any other teachings. So, but here, when we refer to the teachings by Lama Tsongkhapa, of course, the phrase and the expression may be different, but the content is very deep that we find in teachings. So, if we have to consider that it was only after Lama Tsongkhapa's arrival that the yogis are able to realize the subtle form of emptiness in Tibet, then of course we may have to conclude by saying that all the scholars before Lama Tsongkhapa do not understood emptiness, which is very difficult. And even we have great scholars in the Nyingma, such as Mifam and so on, and they praise the Lama Tsongkhapa in terms of presenting the teaching of the suchness through Tibetan origination, and this is a quite unique teaching of Lama Tsongkhapa. And Lama Tsongkhapa, with the great understanding of all the teachings of the Nagarjuna and other scholars, and based on those realizations and understanding, he imparts the teachings on emptiness. So therefore, it is a supreme teaching among the other masters in Tibet. Reading from page 300. And the measure of generating the special insight. The measure of generating the special insight is having developed the serenity, the meditative serenity, in terms at par with the special insight. And one stayed in the meditative equipoise, meditating on the emptiness, and without losing the original state of the meditative absorption. And if we are able to do analyzation in terms of at the post-meditative state, then one is said to be having gained the special insight. And special insight, the gaining of special insight, is again depends on developing the mental pliancy. So in summary, we need to visualize and meditate very often the benefits and the negativities of meditating and not meditating on the special insight and the wisdom. And for the beginners, especially with having a little taste of the awakening mind, the altruistic intention, then we need to see our great masters. And from them, we need to listen to the different instructions with respect to the awakening mind and the teachings on emptiness. And as soon as you have a slight understanding of the emptiness in your hand, you should not lose it and make it grow further. So His Holiness comments that here the abbots or the former abbots and the tulkus and so on. So first, before you give the guidelines and the advice to other people, so you need to practice yourself. Then it will in accordance to the qualities of the spiritual master presented by Maitreya. And we can also see in the Lam Rim Chemo that if the master himself or herself is not tamed, then there is no way that he or she can tame the mind stream of the disciples. And when it comes to the presentations of 4 ways of gathering the disciple, there is a significance paid to the second line, which says that we have to be in accordance to the needs of the student, which means that the master himself or herself needs to be subdued before imparting any teaching. And once you continue reading from the page number 300, as soon as you have a slightest understanding of the emptiness in your hand, we need to make it grow further by making a great effort. And also at that time, we need to visualize or generate great devotion and wish to develop the wisdom realizing emptiness further until it reaches its final state. And when it comes to the 6th perfection, which is the wisdom, and the wisdom, 6th perfection of wisdom, when it is referred to as having the assembly of all the other perfections, we mean that having oneself the understanding of the emptiness and bringing other people towards the understanding of the wisdom on emptiness is one of the greatest practice with respect to the presentation on the 6th perfection, the wisdom. And the next is training in the 4 ways of gathering your disciples. So the first is in order to make other people satisfied or happy. So first we need to provide them things in terms of generosity, whatever the wealth or the things that they need. So which is the first way of gathering the disciple. And second is in order to bring those the disciples to the path of practice. And the master himself or herself also need to follow whatever the society or the community refers to as the standard way of imparting teachings. For example, the master himself, in terms of if a society is a very clean, has a great paying importance to the hygienic, then the master himself or herself should be also very hygiene and so on. And the third ways of gathering is with the faith and devotion as the base, and the master needs to impart the teachings based on the ultimate reality, the emptiness. And also even to the enemies who wish to kill you out of compassion and altruistic intention, one should be able to say good words and the phrases to those people, especially to the less intelligent ones. So this is with respect to, till now is with respect to the first way of gathering, that is to give what they desire. And His Holiness comments that from the 100 and 200 volumes of Kanjur and Tenjur, the Buddhist direct discourses and the commentaries by Indian scholars. So these texts are the texts that we need to study and investigate and examine. So these are our textbooks for study, but not an object to be refuted and then kept in altars. So even though you may not be able to study advance the very details, but of course, within the Buddhist direct discourses, the 100 volumes, there are Vinayas, which are Vinaya teachings or the commitments are something which are directly given by the Lord Buddha himself. So therefore, those teachings are not for all. But if you look carefully, all the promulgations and proclamation with respect to the 4 defeats and so on actually came out one after the another. Once first there was a basis for one of those defeats, one of those proclamations. And we have to look at the Lord Buddha as our master. And many people see that whenever they run into any kind of problems, they always take the name of Buddha and that you please come and help us. And actually Buddha is someone like once our master who really take care of the students and out of compassion and love and sustain the growth, the mental development of the students. So when I say the 100 volumes of the Buddhist discourses, the Vinaya volumes are something different, which is to be studied only by a certain amount of practitioners. But when it comes to the metaphysics presentation, the Abhidhamma volumes, those teachings are really established after coming into after going through great investigations and critical analysis. And many of you know that since few years I'm trying to draw a distinction between what is called the Buddhist science and also Buddhist philosophy and Buddhist religion. So these 3 distinctions. And also now we have already printed the books for these 3 content. And when someone has to do the introduction to Buddhism, we have to do the introduction to Buddhism based on those books. And no need to just go to the historical accounts of that happened and so. But when you give the introduction to Buddhism, started with the foundation, the basis, and the path, and the resultant state, and so on. And even the other opponent may be a very strong one, but there is no way that possible that they can refuse or negate the presentation on the basis, the path, and the resultant state of Buddha's teaching. And it's also present in the Pabonga Rinpoche's that if there are no non-Buddhist critics, then there is no way that Buddha can give such variety of teachings. So sometimes I myself feel like one of those non-Buddhist masters giving critics. So therefore it is very important to study these teachings. And now another project that I'm trying to do is to make a different section for the 17 Nalanda's masters' teachings and the texts. And if you are able to compile separate texts of the 17 Nalanda masters, then of course we have the 17 Nalanda masters' portrait, the Thanga, and also if we have a separate compilation of the texts of the 17 masters, it would be wonderful. We have about 200 volumes of the commentaries on the Buddhist discourses, and within them, if we are able to extract the teachings and the texts of the 17 Nalanda masters, it will be great. But I think that is not a real urgent. We can take some time. But the most important and the urgency at the moment is in order to understand the stages and the grounds, we need to study the Paramita texts, the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, and so on. And with that, also we need to study the Madhyamika, the middle way philosophy, and also the difference between what is the Savatantrika and the Prasangika schools and so on. And Gundar Rinpoche also says that unless you do not find someone which is the basis of the designation, then there is no way that you can find the object which is designated upon. But I think when Gundar Rinpoche refers to the basis of designation and a valid basis of designation, I think it's a little bit difficult. And we normally say that to any kind of object, unless we generate a valid cognition of refuting all the other critics, so we cannot ascertain that object as the basis of designation. And as also stated that since all the phenomena exist merely by designation or by name and title, and even the title or the name itself do not have its own reality or inherent existence. And if someone says that the mind has its own reality, then it is quite similar to the presentation of the Svatantrika Maitreya, that there is a certain limit of existence, a reality from the object side, and also the mental conceptual thought also create a larger part of it. But when it comes to the highest Mother Mega teaching, there is nothing, not even a pinch of things, not even a drop of water that we can find from its nature or its reality, and every phenomena existed in terms of mere designation. And next is teaching through a melodious voice. And to teach in a nice way is very important in order to gather the disciples and to make them and ordain them, and also make them ripened for the future human rebirths and liberation and so on. And through melodious and skillful teaching, we will be able to bring even the very difficult disciples. Some disciples may be very rich and wealthy, so there is no way that you could gather it or bring such kind of students to the teaching of Buddha by offering the things that they needed, as they already have everything that they need. So for them, the main skillful ways to bring them to the teaching of Buddha is by giving a melodious words. And Gondar Rinpoche says that in this time, even the masters or all others who claim to be the presenters and the masters also do not have their own reality in terms of the emptiness understanding. Sorry. Sorry. And after practicing in the 4 ways of gathering, the disciples, as presented in the Shantideva's Guide to the Way of Bodhisattva, and also the extensive and the middle Lam Rim teachings, and also the compendium of training and so on, after that one should be able to bring those students to the teaching of Vajrayana. So before bringing the teachings of Vajrayana to the students, they should be having a ripened mental stream, which is common to the practice of middling and a great person. And the Vajrayana path, or the Tantric path, is really very different and a very unique path in terms of the completion of 2 accumulations and so on. And it has the qualities of being able to complete the accumulations at a very swift rate, and also the teachings of the Vajrayana are very rare. And in order to receive such teachings, one needs to find a Vajra master which has all the qualities, and which possess all the qualities as presented in the different texts. And from such a master, one need to take the teachings with respect to the 4 Tantra schools and so on. And first, they need to be brought into the Vajrayana teachings through initiations, and by the power of initiations, their mental stream will be ripened, and you must tell them to practice and uphold all the precepts and the commitments that they take during the initiations. And they need to abide by all those guidelines as they took care of their eyeballs. I think the presentation on Special Insight by Shama Rinpoche, I received the Shamar teaching from one master of Golok. His name is Dabwa Gyatso. He's a very simple monk. And he came to India at one time, I think many years before, and I have this conversation with him. And I received the teaching from him, the Shamar Lam Rim. So therefore, I felt a great wish to receive the teaching. And at that time, when I received the teaching, and Rinpoche himself did not have the lineage of the special insight chapter, the presentation on that chapter, then I requested Rinpoche that I had to receive that transmission at any cost. Then Rinpoche also stayed for retreat, and he is a real practitioner who uphold the teachings of the Buddha. So later I received the teaching again from him. So that's what I wanted to share it here. And during what we call the re-civilization period in Tibet, he stayed in the snow mountains and practiced. And later, when I received the teaching from Rinpoche Dabwa Gyatso, and the transmission with respect to the presentation of spatial insight, and Rinpoche himself, when he gave the presentation, teaching on the spatial insight, I think he was around 90s. He's very old at that time. And as soon as I received that transmission, he passed away very soon after that. So I find that a great auspicious for myself that I'm able to receive the teaching. And in terms, it feels that he was waiting for someone to pass on this lineage of the transmission. And as soon as he found someone to give the transmission, then he passed away. So there is a great significance in that. And he is someone who really lived his life in terms of the teachings of Buddha. In Tibet, so the teachings on the Guya Samaja and the He Vajra and the Chakra Samvara are really wonderful by Gusharab Gyatso. And I also did the practice through those texts many times in Tibet. And some of the texts in the Amdo regions, then we find the reference to Agu Sharab Gyatso very often. And there was one government employee, then he says that, oh, who is that Aku? Is it the Aku Temba? Aku Temba is generally the comedian of Tibet. So since they are very familiar with Aku Temba, the comedian of Tibet, so he thought when in the Aku Sharab Gyatso, so Aku must be Aku Temba, the comedian. So these are the verses of the end prayers of the Shamar Lam Rim. So Rinpoche write the verses in this way. Here by prostration and refuge to the Buddhas and all his sons, and also to the scholars of the great India, and also the masters who bestow him great instructions. And so such kind of masters are something very difficult to find, even if you look for eons. So someone who looks for other instruction, then these are really foolish people. But at this degenerated time, when all the masters pass away, and there is no such experienced masters to present you the teachings. So even at that time, for me to rely on the Rinchen Jone Tubden's teaching was a great opportunity. And at the end of these verses, Rinpoche writes that he composed the Shamar Lam Rim in order to present very clearly the meditative, the orders and the stages of meditative as presented in the other traditions. And the 13th Dalai Lama also received many teachings from Shamar Rinpoche. And I think the 13th Dalai Lama also received the Shamar Lam Rim from him. Of course, the 13th Dalai Lama, there was no time to give extensive teachings due to a lot of political responsibilities and so on. And but he considered upholding the vows, the Pratimoksha vows, as one of the supreme practices. Sorry. So Rinpoche here mentions that in the Tsang region and also the central Tibet region, there are various transmissions and commentaries on different Lam Rim teachings. But there seems to be very rare a single text which contains all the instructions together, and which is something very comfortable and convenient for a beginner to practice. So therefore, that was his initial motivation to write this text. And he's also requested by many of his students. And he start writing the text on the earth ox ear, and even after that, due to a lot of other things, he was not able to complete. And recently in Kubum Jambaling, one of the greatest learning center in eastern Tibet, with the divine vision, with the divine presence of Chotu Cherab Ngawang Longdo Yunden Jazo, and my great master Sanjay Chota Pe Sambo, they have requested, they have asked me very strongly to continue the writing. And also the former student of Rongbo, Jamyang Tubden Jazo, and Gwenlong Khenjin Topchok Losang Chu Yuwangchu. So these are the masters who have requested. I think the term Shamar is with respect to the place where he was born. I think it was a district or a province. So I do not know how this province got the term Shamar. So since he hails from this place, so therefore he is referred to as Shamar Rinpoche. And Rinpoche mentions here that he is able to complete the writings of Shamar Lam Rim with the blessings of great master Chizu Sherab Jazo Be Sambo, and so on. So here completes the Shamar Lam Rim, the initial text, and now we will move to the liberation in the palm of your hand. So Lam Rim is actually a different section and a different section on the presentation of special insight. Page number 599. And Lama Tsongkhapa has stated at the initial text, in the initial Lam Rim Chemo, that the difference between center for studies and for practice. So I think that is really a mistake. So many people find that the text of the Panchaparamita, Perfection of Wisdom, and Middle Way philosophy are for one's scholastic academic studies, whereas the practice are of the Lam Rim teachings, which is really wrong. So our practice have to start from the time when we start the Perfection of Wisdom and Middle Way philosophy and so on. So the term Lam Rim, or the stages of the path to enlightenment, has its own significance, where it presents the steps very clearly. But otherwise, the great treatises are very important to be studied, especially the Middle Way philosophy is very important. And in Middle Way philosophy presentation, we have the fundamental of wisdom, then we have Buddha Palida's text, and so on. Then there is not much tradition of studying the Umanyingpo, which is the essence of the Middle Way philosophy by Baba Viveka. And at that time, I felt that I need to have the lineage, the transmission of the Umanyingpo, the essence of the Middle Way philosophy. And Rinpoche himself did not have the transmission at that time. And Rinpoche says that if you give a kind of a commentary, commentarial teaching explaining about the text, then of course the lineage will come by itself. So therefore, I think that if we are able to give the teaching on the essence of Middle Way philosophy through its the notes and the extra editions, it will be of great opportunity for all of us. Reading from page 599, the actual way to achieve mental quiescence. It says in distinguishing between the extremes and the middle way, abandon 5 pitfalls, cultivate 8 adjustments, and that will cause you to achieve it. I claim the 5 pitfalls are laziness, forgetting the instruction, excitement and dullness, non-adjustment and readjustment. In other words, they say you must cultivate the 8 adjustments, which are antidotes to the 5 pitfalls. There are no better instructions on how to achieve single-pointed concentration than those to be found in the classical treatise, the works of Maitreya, Asanga's studies on the various levels. Lama Tsongkhapa started having the vision of Manjushri from Nature Gadong. So before that, Lama Tsongkhapa takes the help of Lama Umaba to communicate with Manjushri. So Lama Tsongkhapa had the direct vision of Manjushri from Nature Gadong. Then he's able to see Manjushri daily. Then when he do the debate and the critics with respect to the Middle Way philosophy, so Manjushri explains in very tough and difficult phrases, and Lama Tsongkhapa replied that it's difficult to understand. And for us, if we find some of the texts very difficult to understand, then first we think of meditating on some deities, and then through the blessing of the deity, we will read the text again, which is the wrong method. So Lama Tsongkhapa, when we replied that he cannot understand those words spoken by Manjushri directly, then Manjushri's answer was that you must study the great text again and more, and if you strive further, then you will generate the understanding. So therefore, there's a saying by Nyeden Sungraba, if someone, instead of increasing one's wisdom by reciting the Manjushri's mantra, it is certain that your intelligence will increase further if you study the collective topics for 1 month, the debating for 1 month. So wisdom and intelligence is something that it grows further and becomes stronger and sharper once you train and familiar further. So you must have the foundation of studying the philosophical and the scriptural texts as the basis, then as a condition to make it grow further. Then if you rely on some deity, Guru Yoga deity and so on, it will be wonderful. Continue reading from page 599, the second para. So if you do not refer back to this classical treatise, you might put your trust in what any Lama you come across may say, claiming this to be instructions. If so, even though you spend the rest of your life in some mountain cave, you will mistake the subtle dullness for meditation. Far too many have been mistaken, directing their attention to the mind itself as the most secret path of gaining mental quiescence. They have missed their big opportunity. Putting effort into such instructions will only make your human rebirth hollow. Many famous Tibetan scholars have been mistaken about the view, how to meditate on it, etc. The discerning should look in detail into each of the traditions and texts of such scholars, and they will then come to understand that this is so. Witness how any part where Jesongkhapa deals with the view, its meditation, and the text involved agrees with the words of all the ultimate Indian pundits and adepts. Further, Manjushri himself cleared up Tsongkhapa's doubts and gave him permission. So we should depend on such instructions because they were formulated with these authoritative scriptures in mind, scriptures that are quiet without the taint of error. But if you pin your hopes on some instruction that does not accord with this text, or that says things not to be found in them, there is the danger of developing some unheard of realization. This applies to the generation and completion stages of the secret tantras down to the most treble level of concentration. All are impossible to achieve without this instruction on how to achieve mental quiescence, whose source is the Shastras, and which deals with the methods for extricating yourself from the 5 pitfalls by cultivating the 8 adjustments. Reading from page number 600. The first pitfall, laziness. This has 4 antidotes. Faith due to seeing the good qualities of single-pointed concentration, yearning and wishing for single-pointed concentration, perseverance in seeking single-pointed concentration, the result of seeking single-pointed concentration, meditative suppleness. What is the goal of our meditation? It is single-pointed concentration. The faith that comes from seeing the good qualities of single-pointed concentration is as follows. The pitfall of laziness is not having any heartfelt desire to enter single-pointed meditation or not being able to continue with it on entering such meditation. The true end result of training is meditative suppleness. Although you do not have this at present, you must think about the good qualities of single-pointed concentration. Engaging in the deeds of Bodhisattva says, you may persevere a long while at recitation and all types of asceticism. What a mind distracted by other things, but the knowledgeable one says it is meaningless. The second pitfall, forgetting the instruction. This is what we term no longer recalling the meditation device. It is highly damaging to the practice of single-pointed concentration. The heart of the middle way says, securely tie the wayward elephant of the mind to the firm pillar of the visualization with a rope of memory, break it in with the hooks of wisdom. You have to tie the elephant of your mind to the pillar of the visualization that you employ, so you need something that you can fasten the mind onto. That is the visualization employed to develop mental quiescence. The meditation device can be almost anything, a visualization or a physical object. Non-Buddhists use stones and pieces of wood for their visualizations. The bamboos visualize the letter A or A. Thus, people who set about achieving mental quiescence employ various devices, but these are mental objects only. Such people do not practice by looking at the devices with their eyes. On the other hand, there are people who do actively look at their meditation devices, but this practice is inferior to the other two already mentioned, for mental quiescence must be achieved with the mind, not with the eyes. The great fifth Dalai Lama and so on have repeatedly refuted that mental quiescence must be achieved with the eyes, not the mind. Once someone who came from India used a bull's horn as his meditation device. He did not employ the other purely mental types of device, yet he nonetheless achieved mental quiescence. This shows that you can achieve it no matter what device you meditate on. Reading from page 602. Nevertheless, when we go about achieving mental quiescence, we visualize the form of the Buddha in accordance with the oral tradition deriving from Tsongkhapa. One major feature of this visualization is that it allows you to build up your collection and purify obscurations. Another major feature, it accustoms you to the Deity Yoga to be found in the secret tantras. It is also most beneficial to be reminded of the Buddha and so on. From your Guru, visualize on the crown of your head emerges Guru Shakyamuni about the size of your thumb. He comes to rest in front of you about level with the gap between your eyebrows. Alternately, you could put him level with your navel, whichever you prefer. Or you could visualize that you transform into Shakyamuni. Some people find it easier to imagine formlessness as their meditation device rather than visualizing something physical. So the Benchen Lama Losang Chugi Gyaltsen began a tradition in his teachings on the Gelugpa Mahamudra that is in keeping with Tsongkhapa's thought in the medium states of the path. So His Holiness comment on with respect to the identifying the very subtle form of laxity. So when the laxity increases, of course, sometimes our intelligence decreases. I have one friend and to whom I have discussion, and he meditated for a long time along with the Guru Deity Yoga. And he told me that after a few years, his intelligence or the memory is inferior than before. So then at that time, I thought that, I didn't tell him exactly, but then I thought that he was mistaken the concentration and the laxity. So what he thought as concentration was actually the laxity, the pitfall of laxity, which was disturbing his mental awareness. In this tradition, you achieve mental quiescence by focusing on the mind itself. So, in terms of the calm abiding meditation, the mind has to be very clear, intelligent, and without having any kind of laxity and excitement. If the mind generates or gets a sense of being sinking, and then of course the pitfall of laxity is arriving. Reading from page 602, the third para. In this tradition, you achieve mental quiescence by focusing on the mind itself, and these people could rarely use it. It even has its counterpart in other sects, where you investigate the conscious operation of the mind. It is also possible to achieve mental quiescence by visualizing the form of the deity as in the generation stage, or by visualizing the letter A or a vertical stroke as in the completion stage. Of course, one can meditate the equanimity in order to dispel the laxity and excitement, but our mind needs to be trained before you meditate on the equanimity here. Reading from page 603, second para. The instruction means you memorize the feature of a drawing or a statue of the victorious one for your meditation device so that you can imagine it as your mental object when you enter meditation, or as your guru has acquainted you, recall the image of the meditation device in your mind's eye. You have begun to utilize your meditation device when you are able to partially imagine your visualization as a rough mental image. We say that you have forgotten the instruction when you have lost its object of your recollection. This is the second pitfall. Its antidote is the fifth of the 8 adjustments, memory, where a strong memory is necessary to maintain the continuity of your meditation device, rather like a hand holding a rosary. An individual's memory may be strong or weak, and this will make it easy or difficult for him to achieve mental quiescence. Compendium of Metaphysics says on the subject of memory, what is memory? Something that functions so as not to allow the mind to forget a thing with which it has been made familiar. In other words, memory necessarily has 3 properties. You must distinguish its object, that is, if you have previously looked at your meditation device and familiarized your mind's eye with its aspects, subsequently, when you direct your mind to these aspects, memory necessarily has the property of retention. That is, you have not forgotten these aspects of the meditation device, and they present themselves to you continually. This is like your vivid recollection of food when you are hungry. Lastly, memory is another property of the function it performs. The mind is meant not to stray or unfocus from the object it is directed inward. If these 3 are present, you will be able to visualize the form of, say, the victorious one clearly in front of you in your mind's eye. Do not become distracted. Retain a tight hold on the visualization. You must imagine the visualization and nothing else. The third pitfall, excitement and dullness. You will fall prey to the third pitfall, excitement and dullness, during your actual meditation period while recalling your meditation device. If you do not differentiate between dullness, mental fog, and excitement, it will be like not recognizing enemies bent on murdering you. Since they are great faults, you must recognize them. Mental fog can be either non-virtuous or neutral. It obscures the consciousness, weighing down both mind and body as you want to go to sleep. It acts as a cause for dullness and is never virtuous. There are 2 kinds of dullness, subtle and coarse. When you recall your meditation device, its image may be steady but unclear. This is coarse dullness. Subtle dullness is as follows. You have not lost the retained features of the visualization. You even have steadiness and clarity of image. But the force of your retention has slackened, and its clarity is not intense. Subtle dullness is the main obstruction to meditation. What do I mean by not being intense? I mean that there is clarity, but the mind has become somewhat slack. At such a time, though the image stability is quite firm, this slackness has acted as a cause for subtle dullness. If the image has intense clarity, the mind is sharp, fresh, vital, and still on the meditation device. I can illustrate the fact that you can have both clarity and stability, but that the clarity may or may not be intense. Suppose you are holding your rosary and bowl in your hands. You may hold them differently, one tightly and one loosely. Or more generally, we can always have faith in a guru, but this may not be particularly strong. From time to time, we may develop more or stronger faith in him. The way we retain our faith is then more acute than before. That is the difference between the two situations. They say this will become very clear in the light of experience in contemplation. It is impossible to put it into words. Sorry. Reading from page 605. Many of the early Tibetan scholars mistook this state and praised it as deepest meditation and deepest relaxation. They had not understood this key point in meditation. If you mistake subtle dullness for meditation, your meditations will not even act as causes for rebirth in form and formless realms. And even in this life, you will be more absent-minded. Because your wisdom becomes unclear, the practice is no better than doing, say, a great deal of meditation on a sadhana, where you visualize yourself as an animal. A compendium of metaphysics says this about excitement. What is excitement? A disturbed aspect, a reason in the conceptual mind of attachment, led astray by beautiful signs. It functions by interrupting mental quiescence. Beautiful objects or the objects of your attachment unfocus the mind. Thus they are the beautiful signs referred to here. Suppose you watch an opera one day and that night you vividly recall the scene. This is an example of recalling an attractive object of your attachment. There is a big difference between lack of focus and excitement. You can become unfocused through an unpleasant object, such as your enemy. At such a time, you undergo lack of focus due to mental distress. Or while meditating on mental quiescence, you can become unfocused by some virtuous object, such as generosity, ethics, and so on. Nevertheless, both lack of focus and excitement may interrupt your mental quiescence. Why then is only excitement assumed to be a thing that interrupts mental quiescence? Lack of focus occurs less and is of shorter duration when its object is either the object of your hostility or when your attention is being directed to something virtuous. Usually, lack of focus is much greater when the object is one of the attachment. So lack of focus is usually of the latter type. Because it is easier to develop than the other forms, it has been given prior to place, and we speak of excitement alone. But note, when you meditate on mental quiescence, your mental state will be interrupted by two other types of lack of focus, unfocusing due to either pleasant or unpleasant objects, and lack of focus due to, for example, recalling some generosity you might have performed, prostrations you might have made, etc. When you meditate for mental quiescence, you have to put a stop to these forms of unfocusing whenever they occur. Page number 606, the last para. The fourth pitfall, non-adjustment. When you get excited or dull, one of the antidotes, non-adjustment, becomes a pitfall. And it is its own antidote. If your vigilance has detected any dullness or excitement, whether in coarse or subtle form, you must immediately apply the antidotes without further ado. The seventh of the 8 adjustments, readjustments, is actually the antidote to the 8 of the adjustments, equanimity, also known as non-adjustment. Adjustment has to be mentally applied against non-adjustment. These two are like enemy scouts. As soon as one sees the other, he tries to stop him. So how should this antidote be applied? Subtle dullness is a state of depressed mental activity. Thus both depression and dullness have much the same consequences. With subtle dullness, you have clarity and stability of the image, but the quality of its retention has dropped, and the clarity therefore is not as intense. Sorry. So the continuity here is important. So how should this antidote be applied? Subtle dullness is a state of depressed mental activity. Thus both depression and dullness have much the same consequences. With subtle dullness, you have clarity and stability of the image, but the quality of its retention has dropped, and the clarity therefore is not as intense. Whenever you develop this form of dullness, there is no need to quit your meditation session or break of visualizing, since it is sufficient to tighten up your retention of the image. However, when your hold becomes too tight, you develop excitement, and you should then loosen your hold. As the Bhagavan said, if the Vena's string is too taut, loosen it, tighten or loosen it as needed, making sure that it does not get too slack. In the end, the sound will be sweet. You should do the same thing. Loosen a little when you feel you will develop excitement, and tighten your hold a little when you feel that dullness will ensue if you loosen any more. Experience dictates the border between these two. If you do not analyze intelligently through your vigilance, it will be very hard for you to put your finger on it. Acharya Chandragomin said, apply effort and you get excited. Abandon it and you develop depression. If this is true and it is so hard to gain absorption, why do this? It will only disturb my mind. Doing this sort of thing may be mentally fatiguing, but amongst all types of enemies, an enemy you mistake for one of your family is the hardest of all to identify. Because of this, they are more dangerous. Likewise, there is great danger in mistaking these types of dullness for single-pointed concentration, so you must be skilled in this fine-tuned state. Thus, in spite of having fine-tuned your mind, you may again lose the intensity of the image clarity. When this happens, the retention lapses, as though the thought is tied, and the image is no longer clear. If this will not go away, coarse dullness has returned. It says in the Art of the Middle Way, when depressed, meditate on expensive visualization, and thus open yourself. That is the fault, is that your mind is in a great knot. So you should meditate, broadening the visualization somewhat. If the problem does not then go away and your mind becomes depressed, when you resume the visualization, try a method to be uplifted or cheer yourself up by contemplating how difficult it is to find the most beneficial optimum human rebirth. Or you could contemplate the good qualities of three jewels, study the benefits of devoting yourself to a spiritual guide, contemplate the benefits of bodhicitta, etc. This will uplift your mind. You could imagine rays of light shining on you or meditate on things like giving visualization. Such meditation will raise your mind to a higher plane and it will then retain the visualization again. Our minds have not been familiar with this sort of thing in the past, and it will be difficult to gain immediate benefit from these techniques. But when we become familiar with them, the contemplation of things such as how hard it is to gain a human rebirth will be like splashing cold water on our faces. The difficulty will disappear. If your dullness will still not go away, employ a more forceful means of removing it. Visualize your mind as being a white light at your heart. As you utter the syllable Fat, your mind comes out of the fontanelle on the top of your head and penetrates the depths of space. Think that your mind and space have become inextricably mixed. Do this as many times as seems best. If still the problem will not go away, terminate your meditation session. Mental fog is causing you to develop dullness. Use some means to make the mental fog, sleepiness, or grogginess to go away. Settle down in some cool spot, go for a walk on some high, open place, go for a visit, splash water on your face, and so on. If this clear your mind, resume the visualization as before. So we will stop here for lunch.